Well, hello there. So in this video, we're going to be taking a look at Extra Practice Module 16. Now, just before I get into this, couple of three things to tell you. Number one is that Module 16 is way technical, and a lot of that stuff is not on the AP tests. It's not on my tests, and the stuff that I'm referring to is anything that really kind of goes into detail about the consumption function and the distinction between unplanned and planned investment spending. That stuff isn't going to be on the exams. I think it's really interesting, but it's quite technical, and so I don't want you to feel all scared and stuff if you start reading through this and you're like, I can't do it. No, you can do it, but just calm down. You'll be okay. The most important thing that comes out of this module are the multipliers, though. And that's something you absolutely must know. And I talked about it a lot in the lectures and in the practice problems and things like that. So you've got to know that stuff. So so when we get to those questions, oh my goodness, my hair is not working today. When we get to the questions about the multipliers, we'll kind of spend a little bit more time. But the other stuff is kind of less important. So explain why a decline in investment spending caused by a change in business expectations leads to a fall in consumer spending. And this one is an important one. So check your understanding, number one. And so if you have investment spending going down, and then there will be a fall in consumer spending as a result. And that's because so I goes down and therefore C goes down because of the multipliers, right? And at kind of root, what we're saying here is that because investment, right, spending is multiplied through the economy, is multiplied through the economy. And if you don't understand what I just said here, you've got to go back and re-review the lectures a little bit. The idea here is that investment spending, like government spending, both kind of have this multiplied effect, like a ripple effect in the economy, such that like an initial investment will have some carryover effects on other people. And that's because one person's spending is another person's income. And it's particularly true for investment spending. All right. Number two says, what's the multiplier if the marginal propensity to consume is 0.5? So if MPC is 0.5, then we know that MPS is 0.5, and we know the spending multiplier is 1 over the MPS, so that's 2, and so the spending multiplier is 2. If we know the MPC is 0.8, which is the second part of this question, MPS is 0.2, and so the spending multiplier is 1 over 0.2, which is 5. Okay? So unless it specifies and it just says what's the multiplier, assume it's the spending multiplier. Number three, sorry, I'm all stuffy. Suppose a crisis in the capital markets makes consumers unable to borrow and unable to save. Whoa. What implication does this have for the effects of expected future disposable income on consumer spending? So if people can't borrow and they can't save, right? So this is a weird situation, but like imagine if you can't borrow and you can't save, then every time you're like, I wish I could save, nope, you got to spend it all, right? And you can't it interrupts this process of borrowing, so you can't kind of borrow more today on the hope that in the future your disposable income would be higher, which is called kind of smoothing out your consumption. So people often will borrow now knowing that 5 years from now their income will be higher and they'll kind of be able to smooth it. But this is saying you can't do that. And so the implication that this has for the effects of expected future disposable income is that it has none, right? It can't, because on today's consumer spending, right, isn't affected at all, because you can't smooth your consumption in the sense that like you can't borrow a little bit today because you think that your income will be higher in the future, right? And likewise, if you think that your income will be lower in the future, you can't save today. You can't save a little bit today in order to make up for that. You have to spend everything today. And maybe the easiest way to say this would be, it makes it so future income has no effect on today's spending, right? No effect on today's spending. And the other kind of aspect that maybe connect this into the multiplier is what would be the MPC? Well, if you had this situation where you can't borrow and you can't save, then MPC equals 1 because there is no savings, right? So then the next one, for each event, explain whether the initial effect is a change in planned investment spending or a change in unplanned investment spending. Remember, and this is one where I said it's not really that important for the exam, but I will go through these answers with you. So for the first one, an unexpected increase in consumer spending. That's not going to affect people, the business's planned spending on machines. It would affect their unplanned inventories. So like if all of a sudden, if all of a sudden people start spending more money, it's going to reduce the amount. Therefore, it reduces inventories, right? If they're spending money today, it's going to reduce inventories, and therefore I will decrease because changes in inventories are part of investment spending. And that's kind of what this is actually telling us. And so realistically, this kind of inventories is actually unplanned, is actually kind of used as a predictor of how the economy is going to do because it's a leading indicator of how are consumers spending their money. If we can track inventories, we can see like, that means that spending is much higher now or spending is much lower. It has the initial effect actually of reducing aggregate demand. And this is a little counterintuitive because you'd say, well, consumer spending is way up. Well, but the effect is that it reduced inventories and it reduced investment spending. It's not enough that it outweighs it, but it is something to consider here. So that's A. B is a sharp rise in the cost of business borrowing. That's not going to affect unplanned inventories. It would just affect planned investment. So planned, and even if it's really sharp change, then it's just still going to affect their planning because the interest rate would affect like what are we going to do next year, or are we going to expand, or are we going to not expand? If there's a sharp rise in the cost of business borrowing, that would decrease borrowing and therefore decrease investment spending. C says a sharp increase in the economy's growth rate of real GDP. Again, this is not going to necessarily change the amount of inventory you have on hand, but as a business owner, there are some things that would shift your investment spending. And if there's lots and lots of growth in the economy, then it's going to cause you to expand your firm. You're going to say, I want to make my capacity larger to kind of capitalize on this expansion. So again, planned, it would allow you to change your plans. And this one would say increase investment spending. And that should say C. And then D is an unanticipated fall in sales. And that's basically the reverse of A. So this is going to change unplanned investment spending. And if it's an unanticipated decrease in sales, then your inventories are going to go up. Inventories would rise. And that actually causes investment spending to rise. And so this, though, you could say, like, if you're tracking inventories and you're kind of looking at what's the future going to hold for the economy, and you start to see inventories tack upwards, that would kind of indicate to you that, consumers are pulling back on their spending. And that's kind of useful information, right, for predicting how the economy is going to do. Let's see, multiple choice number 1. Changes in which the following leads to a shift in the aggregate consumption function. So again, this is not going to appear on the quiz. So I'm going to put a little X with this one. But what would cause basically people to increase their consumption spending at all different levels of their income? That's what the consumption function actually relates, is your consumption and your disposable income. And so expected future disposable income, that would affect it, because if you thought you would have a lot more income in the future, then it would cause you to consume more today. Aggregate wealth, which is kind of the same thing in the idea of saying, like, if you have more aggregate wealth, it will affect your consumption spending today. Your current disposable income, though, won't. And that might seem a little weird, but the reason that it won't is because on the axis of a consumption function is your current disposable income and your current consumer spending. So if your current disposable income changes, it's not going to shift that function around. It's just going to cause you to move along the curve to a different amount of consumption spending. So the correct answer here is D. Number two, the slope of a family's consumption function, that's just the marginal propensity to consume. So that's what we use when we talk about these multipliers. We use the marginal propensity to consume, and it's the slope because it's the change in consumption over the change in income. You know, we learned that in the lectures that that's the MPC. It's the change in consumption, the marginal propensity to consume over the change in income, which is just the slope. So C. Number three, given the consumption function. So again, this is one that will not appear on the exam because we didn't really talk about the consumption function. If blah, 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 16,000 plus 0.5 times the current disposable income is 20. So 0.5 times 20 is 10. So 26,000, B. You just solve the equation. That's how you do those. Four, and that was kind of actually relatively easy if you understand what they're asking. The level of planned investment spending is negatively related to the interest rate, right? That's, you know, kind of thinking about why would the planned investment go down? Well, it would be because the interest rates are higher. So the rate of return on investment level, and now interest rate, D. There we are. Again, that one's not particularly like, I don't really actually like most of these questions. Most of the time, these aren't asking about the multipliers, so I'm not really a big fan of these questions. Actual investment spending in any period is equal to the planned and the unplanned inventory changes. So I think planned investments, unplanned, yeah, so A. And again, that one's not really, none of these are particularly helpful in the sense that they're not going to appear, in that sense on the exams and things, but they're useful for thinking through it. So let's take a look at number two, free response number two. I do like free response number one, though. It kind of goes through the consumption function a little bit. List the three most important factors affecting planned investment spending. Explain how each is related to actual investment spending. All right, so I am going to do this one, but I'm just going to kind of do it in a perfunctory way because this again is not going to appear on the exam. So let's say the first one is the interest rate, right? And we'd say if interest rate goes up, we'd say investment goes down. The next one would be like GDP growth rate. How's the economy growing right now? And we'd say if these are better maybe to say not therefore, but if GDP goes up, we'd say investment spending will go up because, and this is more like the rate, because these businesses are going to say to themselves, well, the economy is growing, and in order to maintain the amount of productive capacity that I was used to, I'm going to have to expand my business, right? So kind of just thinking about like you have more customers, you have more economic activity, and so in concomitant with that, you would need more machines, bigger stores, that sort of thing, and so you'll see more investment spending going along with that as a result. And then the third one is kind of like the level of the current level of capital, right? The current level of capital. And we'd say if not much capital lately, right? We'd say therefore investment spending would rise. And this is kind of an abstract idea, but the idea here is like if you don't have very much machinery and factories and new construction and things for 2 or 3 or 4 years, and there hasn't been very much going on, then there's kind of a backlog in another way to think about it. Like, your parts have been wearing out and stuff, and there's pent up demand. And we saw this after the 2008 financial crisis when basically new home construction ground to a halt for about 2 or 3 years. And then 2014, 2015, there was a huge spike in investment spending because they were trying to play catch up, right? Trying to kind of clear that backlog. So that's really what this is. All right. So I hope this helped you. I know that actually a lot of it wasn't really about multipliers, but hopefully it helped you. I'll see you next time.